Hello, and welcome everyone to this first podcast for Biology 112, Foundations of Cell Biology. In this podcast, I want to talk to you a little bit about why we're studying cell biology, the approach we're going to take in understanding cells this semester, and then the teaching mechanism that I'm going to use to present the material to you. But first, let's talk about the importance of cell biology. And in thinking about the importance of cell biology, I want to make a quick list here of what life is. When we think about life in all organisms, all life has to have several similar qualities that help them function. And these are in no particular order, but we're interested in how life moves. We're also interested in how life communicates. We're also interested in how different living organisms use energy. We're interested in how they reproduce. We're interested in how they respond to external stimuli. And ultimately, we're interested in how they evolve. And if we're interested in these features of life, and we're interested in studying life as biologists, it's important that we go down to the basic unit of life, and that is the cell. So the cell is the basic unit of life. So if an organism is a single cell, like bacteria or yeast or archaea, then you can study that single cell and you'll learn how they move, how they communicate, how they use energy, how they reproduce, how they respond to external stimuli, how they evolve. If you're studying multicellular organisms, and we're primarily going to think about plants and animals in this class, understanding how this single cell in a multicellular organism moves, communicates, uses energy, reproduces, responds to stimuli, and evolves, then we understand, or at least we step towards understanding how a multicellular organism as a whole carries out these life characteristics. By understanding life in a single cell and ultimately in a multicellular organism, it helps us understand how that life functions during healthy situations versus unhealthy, or I'll just write diseased situations. You kind of need to know healthy before you can really appreciate disease. By understanding these concepts of life and understanding a healthy cell, healthy organisms, diseased cells, diseased organisms, it leads to lots of different things, some of which you've learned about in other classes, you've seen in the news, but we can certainly think about new vaccines. Understanding this will help us understand fertility and ultimately infertility. Understanding cells will also help us understand what's often called forensic medicine, or just forensics in general as well. Biotechnology. Understanding cells helps us generate new cells or cells that have been engineered to produce certain products. Stem cells. This will be something in the news and has been for a long time. And we'll end here with transplantation. And we could go on and on with this list, but I'll just stop here, mainly because I'm out of room. But before we can get to these things here, we ultimately have to go back to our good friend, the cell. We have to understand this cell. And by understanding this cell here, it will help us understand this multicellular organism. Now we can't just jump in and say, well, let's start looking at a cell. I guess we could, but that's not what we're going to do. Our approach will be slightly different. We want to kind of build up to the cell and then ultimately to a multicellular organism. So before we can understand the cell, we have to understand a few other things. And in our class, we'll begin by talking about cellular chemistry. Once we understand that, and much of that will be a review for you, we'll want to look at small and large molecules in the cell, like amino acids for a small molecule and proteins for a large molecule. We'll want to understand how they function and work together and build larger structures, for instance, membranes. We'll want to understand how within this cell here, it uses energy. So I'm just going to write metabolism. That's going to be important. And then we're going to want to understand larger structures in cells, like organelles. The cytoskeleton, which I'm just going to put as CS. We're also going to want to understand how cells divide. And for this, we're going to look at mitosis and how we make two equal, identical cells. So how this single cell reproduces. And then we're going to talk about how a particular cell may communicate with another cell. So let's write communication here. And this will be, for the most part, the order we go in class. And then we're going to end on thinking about how cells communicate and respond to the environment, how this will lead to multicellular organisms. And then we'll start talking about tissues and organ systems. And much of that will continue on as you take courses like mammalian physiology or other physiology courses. So essentially, this is what our course is going to be, as you see on this board here. I would now like to spend a little bit of time talking about the manner in which I will teach this class. Over decades of research has shown us that the more active learning we can do in a classroom, the higher degree of learning that happens, and more importantly, the degree of retention is increased. So I use an approach called TeamBased Learning, and we often just call it TBL. So what does TBL mean? Well, typically there are teaching modules. So let me write module here. And these teaching modules consist of 3 parts. The first part being preparation. The second part is a long term, but I'll spell it out here, but we don't really use this term too much in class. But we call these readiness assurance tests. And in our class, we'll take an individual, which we'll often refer to as an IRAT for individual readiness assurance test, or we'll call them GRATs for group readiness assurance tests. And the third part in these modules is what we call an application. Sometimes I call these activities, but I mean the same thing. The readiness assurance tests are what we might call lower learning, or things that are more like recall. Whereas the application are going to focus on higher learning practices. Now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how a typical class or typical module might proceed. We think of things that we're going to do outside of class, and we can think about things we're going to do inside of class. So on any given day, the first thing you need to do before class is you have to prepare. And I will give you several tools to help you prepare. The first one are the readings from your textbook. However, I think it's a little unfair for me to just tell you you have to read this chapter and come in knowing it all on your own. For some chapters, you might very well be able to do that easily. Other chapters, it might take a little bit more work. So what I will do is I will provide two tools for you. One thing that I call a note-taking guide. And I'll talk about these in a moment and in class. But these are designed to help guide you through your particular readings. And when you're done with the note-taking guides, you should have a working study guide as you prepare for quizzes and tests. The other thing I will provide you with are podcasts, just like the one you're watching now. Most days, maybe all days, there will be specific podcasts for you to watch. And these podcasts will go over most of the points, many of the points on the note-taking guide, maybe not all of them, but many of them. And they will also coincide with your readings. You're not required to watch the podcast. You're not required to do the note-taking guides or the readings. These are tools to help you come to class prepared. Now, coming to class the next day, this is what we're going to do inside of class. We're going to do every day, you'll come in and you'll take an IRAT, these individual readiness assurance tests. For this, you will use your iClickers. So make sure you bring those to class. The next thing you will do is you'll take a GRAT, these group readiness assurance tests. This will be the exact same quiz as the IRAT. And we'll use scratch-off cards, and I'll explain these that first day of class. This will take about the first 15, maybe 20 minutes of class. The remainder of class time will be spent doing specific applications. So let me recap what will happen each day. As I said, you'll take an IRAT, GRAT, and this will be based upon what you did to prepare for class. As I mentioned before, this will be lower learning objectives, more kind of recall facts. These applications will then take this basic knowledge and build upon it to do more advanced problems. Following class, there's a quiz, or will be quizzes. These won't be every day. Typically what I'll do is I'll have a set of them for each week, and they'll be due that Sunday. If you can, take the quizzes shortly after class. That works out best, but I know you're busy and it may not be always the easiest way to do it. Then you have to begin to prepare for the next day, where you'll take, again, a new IRAT, GRAT, and application based upon what you are preparing for that day here. This cycle repeats throughout the semester. I've used this model for 100 level courses, 300 level courses, 500 level courses. I've used this model for teaching at the med school. And in all of these places, I see improvement in learning, improvement in test scores. And so it's a little bit more work, but the end game is that you will learn a little more and you'll remember a little more. And we'll talk a little bit more about this the first day of class as well. Now I want to step away and look at, I'm going to post something up on my computer so you can look at it. I'm going to go to the Blackboard page and walk through a few things that you need to notice on the Blackboard shell. It's not fully populated yet, but it will be soon. Okay, here's our Blackboard shell. At this point, you're probably fairly familiar with navigating the general features of Blackboard. I did want to point out a few things that I have on here to help you prepare for class. You've probably found most of them since you're watching this video, but I do want to just take a few minutes to introduce some things to you. There will be, under Course Materials, when you click on that, there will be a separate folder for each day. So for day one, you can see that this folder contains a podcast and a note-taking guide. If we click on that, we see these two items. Most days there will be more than one podcast. There will typically be between 2 and 4 podcasts. In total time, they should be between 40 and 60 minutes. I will try to keep them closer to the 40-minute time limit though. Since you're watching this podcast, I know that when you hit this button here, it takes you directly to the YouTube channel that shows you the podcast that you're watching right now. You've probably seen this too, but let me go ahead and pull it up. It's the note-taking guide. Every day there will be a separate note-taking guide, and they are set up in the same manner for each day. Now for Chapter 1, you've already covered a lot of this material in Biology 111. However, we want to highlight some things that weren't emphasized as much in Biology 111 and some things that were emphasized in Biology 111, but we want to build upon those concepts in 112. So much of Chapter 1 will be a review. But how do you fill out these note-taking guides? The note-taking guides are set up to match the textbook. So for instance, section 1.1 of chapter 1, it's titled, "What does it mean to say that something is alive?" Then these main subheadings here are the subheadings for section 1.1. So just leave these bolded areas alone. But next to the bolded areas are questions that you can find answers to in that section. Sometimes there will be one question like you see here. Sometimes there will be multiple questions. But you should be able to answer these questions by reading the textbook or watching the podcasts. For day 1, this note-taking guide, you will have to get all the information by reading the textbook, because most of this is review for you from Biology 111. But let's go ahead and fill out one of these that isn't clearly defined in your textbook. What are the 3 tenets of the cell theory? I give you a hint that they're embedded in these questions here, but since your book doesn't clearly state that these are the 3 tenets of the cell theory, I want to go ahead and list them for you. The first one is all living things are made of one or more cells. Second, all cells come from pre-existing cells. The third is the cell is the fundamental unit of cellular function. Or you could say it's the fundamental unit of life. Then what you should do for each of these questions, using your readings, answer just as I on other days throughout the semester. You'll want to use your readings from the textbook with the podcast, because I use the podcast to introduce new ideas and more complex ideas. You'll notice that in this particular note-taking guide, I have an additional section that's not found in your textbook, and that is understanding your syllabus. As you look at your syllabus, these are some key features that you should know. And these will be some of the key questions that are on your syllabus quiz the first day of class. So the first day of class, you will have questions on your syllabus, and you will also have 1 to 3 questions from these areas up here. Okay, let's go back to Blackboard.